Hey, what's up everyone? This is Anthony from Anthony's Customs, and for this review we are looking at the Play Arts Kai DC variant Supergirl figure. You just saw the Superman review recently. She's just a tiny bit shorter than him, but she's definitely designed to be similar to him, and they both look great. This one is definitely a contender for knocking out Wonder Woman as the best female one. I know there are only two so far if you don't count Flash and Green Lantern. But this one is pretty good. The only real downside, kind of similar to Superman, is the cape. It's a little iffy in that we have this kind of big gap here. They don't overlap well at all because of the way it's designed. We'll get to that in a minute though. Let's go ahead and take an overview of the figure. She stands almost exactly 10 inches tall to the top of her hair. She does come with a few accessories. We have the sword, which is removable. It pegs in under her hip armor there, so she has this big sword sheath which is really large, and there goes the cape. We'll talk about that in a minute. The sword does come out and it's done nicely. It's a really cool looking sword. There's some shading on the blade, and then the handle is painted up nicely, so it's pretty nice. I like that she has a sword because it's a cool accessory for any of these characters. People say, well, why does Supergirl need a sword? She probably doesn't need a sword, but why not have one? I mean, they're pretty cool. So that's all the reasoning I really need. Then we do have some other accessories, kind of like Superman's. We have this right here, only this time it doesn't have broken brick or concrete. It just has like translucent blue plastic with white stripes on it, and it looks pretty cheap, to be completely honest. The lettering looks okay, but the rest is just kind of blah. It's only barely translucent. It does have a ball peg in it, so it can be posed around. But the little stand is just, it's actually kind of yellow. It's weird and bent, so I don't know if it's like an old one they pulled on accident and threw it in the packaging or what, but it's just kind of a useless accessory. I think it's going to be hard to pose her and actually have that be a useful piece. We do have an alternate face. Her face looks pretty good. I'll get to that in more detail later. But then we have the angry face with the heat vision eyes, so that's kind of nice. I like having interchangeability. We have the two open hands, as you can see here. Then we also have 4 extra hands. So we have this open hand that does have a peg in it. And we have a closed fist. And we have a gripping hand. And we have, where'd it go? Another closed fist. Now as far as this hand with the peg in it, I don't know what that's for. I just saw that peg. Maybe it's for holding this. It's got to be for holding that. And then does that mean these come off? I literally just opened this, so I can't say for sure. We're going to have to look at it. Let's look at it together. Do these pegs come out? They don't. Alright, well, you know what that means. It means I have to cut the camera and check the instructions. Now, BRB. Okay, so I was right. These pegs do come out. Mine aren't wanting to come out, but they're supposed to come out, so that little strap comes off, and then the hand does have the peg in it so that she can hold the sword scabbard like that or like that. So that's pretty self-explanatory, but since these weren't coming out, I wasn't positive, but I'm glad I checked. And then I didn't mention it in case you're curious. To swap out the faces, you just pull off the front of the hair, and then the face goes on, and then the hair goes back on over that. So pretty simple there. And then the last accessory she has, not counting the now standard Play Arts Kai display stand, is a cape, just like Superman's. It does have kind of a flatter side here and a more shiny side, but it still has the same problems, and it actually has more, which I'll explain. It's still really bunched up here, and it creates a big problem for posing. Mine, actually, the wire came broken, so that's going to be a problem for me. Hopefully you guys don't have that issue. We're going to talk about the plastic cape during the review, but for now we'll just talk about the cloth cape. So her pegs for her cape go actually straight up into her body, so that actually reduces the posability somewhat. Since you can't rotate around on these, it wouldn't do any good. So these peg in, and being that she's a much smaller figure, that bunching is a huge problem, more so than even for the Superman figure. From the front, it's not as big of a deal, so I think a lot of people are still going to end up using the cloth cape on her, put her in a flying stance or something, flying pose, and the cloth cape will work okay. But it's still just executed really terribly, I think, and I wish they would have spent the money on other accessories, because the cloth capes, while they look okay from some angles, it's just not well done. So that's a big problem for me. Alright, let's go ahead and look at the figure in detail, and I'll explain the problems of even the plastic cape as we get to them. If I can unpeg this without totally destroying this poorly designed cape. Come on out of there. Why is it not coming out? Alright, so the figure itself. She has a really nice head sculpt and a really nice face paint application, whatever you want to call it. Some people said it looks too much like Barbie. That's what Supergirl kind of looks like. She looks like a really hot, blonde, white chick. So that's pretty much what Barbie is. And this is the anime version, so she's got the kind of more large, animated looking eyes. But I think it turned out really good. I like the way it looks. Her hair does have two articulated pieces. You can see the ball hinges back here. Unfortunately, they're bulky pieces, and they're kind of thick. That's bulky. I mean, they're bulky and they're shaped already. So it's really hard to excuse me, it's really hard to pose them in a practical way. Also, the pegs tend to pop out on that one. So, I mean, technically you can spin them around to the other side, and it might be okay for a pose you're doing, but having this sculpted piece, they don't really work as well as they should. So, unless they're going to make the pieces smaller or more kind of uniformly sculpted, you're going to end up leaving the hair just the way it came. So it's a nice idea, just not executed as well as it probably should have been, which is okay. I mean, I don't mind leaving the hair like this, but having those hinges in there does detract from the look a little bit, so I wish they would have done a little bit of a better job with that. That being said, the head articulation's pretty good, as long as you are willing to move the hair to get the head to look around, which is going to be necessary, but see, it does look kind of awkward. So we have a double ball peg for the neck, or for the head, and the neck is on a double ball peg as well. We do have a little bit more limitation in the neck itself compared to Superman, but the head should be posable just fine. You're going to have to play with the hair to make it look good, though. Alright, so the shoulders, she's got that weird kind of swivelly butterfly joint that Superman had. Hers is easier to show you. It swivels like that, which does work, and it does look better, but it doesn't work quite as well as the standard butterfly joint. It definitely looks better though, so I'm okay with it. Standard ball hinge here. This is not connected to the shoulders, connected to the bicep, so that moves around with the bicep swivel. Single jointed elbow, just a little bit better than 90 degrees. Swivels at both ends, and then we have the same type of hinge in the wrist, so it'll swivel here, and is ratcheted. The upper torso articulation, just like Superman, it's really quite limited. Let me pause this real quick. The cats are freaking out. I'll be right back. Okay, so stop the cats from doing what they're doing. Back to this torso articulation. You do have a little bit more play in the rotation here compared to Superman, but she still has almost no forward and backward movement, almost no side to side. It's really just that kind of angled swivel, which could come in handy. It's not a problem. It's just the rest would have been better as well. And then for the lower torso, just like Wonder Woman, we have a pretty good range of articulation from side to side. Forward and back, it's pretty good as well, but you do get a gap in there depending on how you pose it, so be aware of that. Get that back in there. The whole skirt piece is a floating piece on top by itself. Then she does have her underwear floating piece as well, so you should be able to pose her just fine. These are all, well, the front piece is that one middle piece and then the two bigger pieces. Then we have the side piece and more back pieces. So it's pretty nicely done. It shouldn't really impede the articulation too much. The hips are on ratcheted hinges, so you can get the legs to ratchet side to side and front to back, and then they swivel around that joint as well. Double jointed knees. They look pretty good. They're not the best design, but they're definitely far from the worst, so I'm okay with that. They look pretty nice. The ankles, standard ball hinge for the ankle, swivel here and here. And then she does have a hinge in her toe just like Superman, but it's almost useless. It doesn't have any range of motion as far as I can tell. Yeah, so that's not the best. But she, I have gotten her to stand, even though her heels are even more wonky than Wonder Woman's. You just have to be really careful. Maybe a little hot water to pull these apart. But it can be done. It's just going to be really tricky. So let's talk about the figure in general. The paints are pretty good. I do like the color scheme they decided to go for with the various blues and gunmetals and silvers with the black and gold and red mixed throughout. I think it's a really nice design for Supergirl. I'm glad that they integrated the skirt and did the long sleeves. I think that's a cool design. And they made her really curvy. If you didn't notice, She's even got her butt cheeks starting up at the top up there. I know it's not really butt cheeks, but they made her really curvy. So for those of you that like your action figures particularly sexualized, if that's the right word, I don't know, then this is one for you. They did a good job painting the skin tones, which is sometimes an issue. It's just a really well done figure. It looks great. Just like Superman, we have all kinds of detail in the hands. I like that they only went with the armor on the two parts, on the two fingers instead of all of them. It just gives it a little bit more style. It's just a really sharp looking figure all the way around. You know, the sword, scabbard and sheath, and or whatever you want to call it. It's just cool looking. It's really cool. So now let's talk about the problem, the biggest problem, which is the cape. The figure looks great. Technically you could leave it like this and she would just have a little tiny cape, and that's up to you if you want to do that. I could see a lot of people doing that. But let's talk about the cape. So it has these hinged pieces again. This side looks okay. When it's like this, it doesn't look horrible. When you start to fold it, it starts to look awkward. But this side is actually one of the better done pieces. It looks okay for the most part, however you put it. Mine have some scratches on them. That's the way it came. That's unfortunate. So this hinge is okay. It still creates a very narrow cape at the top, and it flares out a whole lot at the bottom. It's not my ideal design. This side, on the other hand, maybe some hot water would help that, but I don't think so. It seems to be sculpted like that. And when you rotate it, it just augments the problem. It just sticks out and doesn't look right. And then when you rotate it back, it's just not a good design. It's disappointing, really. And now let's talk about how they look when they're on the figure. Since you have to peg them in upward like this instead of going in that way, you can't rotate them. Normally you can rotate them around like this because this peg goes in this way. So you can spin the cape around like this. Since they go in upward, you have to rotate the whole peg around, which is almost impossible to do while it's on the figure. So you have to rotate the peg around and then rotate the cape if you want it to stick out to the side, which isn't that big of a deal since it can be done, but it makes it a lot harder to lift the cape back and rotate it at the same time if you want to pose it that way. And additionally, there's one other problem. Just like Superman, her cape doesn't overlap really well at all. There's a big gap in there. It's very narrow at the top, so posing it and not making it look like two capes is going to be a problem. That said, you know, it does have some problems, but it's still a really awesome looking character, awesome figure of this character. I can't talk. It does take some work to balance her, but as you can see, I just did it fairly quickly with one hand, so it can't be that big of a deal. Let's put the sword on her so you can get a quick look at everything. Which, like I said, some people are going to complain about the sword, but I think it looks cool, so who cares? Stand. Stand, please stand. For the sake of the review, please stand. Maybe we can roll this around a little bit more, and it'll balance her out. And there we go. She's not balancing on the cape. The cape is not touching the table, and I got her to stand. So it's a good figure overall. I do recommend it, especially if you like Supergirl or Superman or DC or Play Arts or any of those. This one is definitely not the worst we've seen by any means. It's a really sharp figure, and I do recommend it. Thanks for watching, guys. Stay tuned for more figure reviews, custom figures, and other good stuff. And in the meantime, keep collecting.